Welcome to the Analog Gamers Podcast, a short podcast on board games and board gaming experiences. Here are your hosts.
I'm Shane.
And I'm Brent.
And I'm Frank. Hello, everybody. We are going to spend this episode talking about route and network building games. There are not a lot of these in the mass market games. And for once, we will not be using Monopoly as a reference.
But we mentioned it, so.
These are games where you have, in all honesty, the route network building games have maps that look a lot like point-to-point movement games because you have spots on a board and you have connecting lines, except this time instead of moving along those connecting lines, you're actually building along them. So you are attempting to build a route to extend into new areas and gain points, or to connect to places on the board, or you're building a network in the attempt to get as many connecting lines as possible. The direction is less important. There are some games in this category that are definitely our favorites and definitely excellent games that are great games for just about anybody to play.
Well, I think a lot of them are kind of on the gateway game
Yes.
or easily accessible end. So probably two of the most popular or most commercial games would be Ticket to Ride and Settlers of Catan.
Yes.
So in Ticket to Ride, you're literally building train tracks between cities. And one of the ways that you gain victory points is by the length of the tracks that you build, as well as whoever has the longest track at the end of the game.
Overall. Connecting. Yes.
Longest connecting track gets an additional 10 points for the base game.
So while that might have been the one that most people know, the one I thought about when this came up was Into the Desert, which we talked about during our abstract episode. And I think it's because of route. And I thought with the camels, you're actually building what essentially would amount to a trade route. So that's the one that came up in my mind, because you're taking your camels and you're building a line out of your camels to points.
So what's interesting about that one is that one does not have lines and spots on the map. It actually is a map that's divided up into hexagons. And in a lot of these games, if there are lines, there's predefined lines. This is Ticket to Ride. This is Power Grid. Once one person takes that line and now owns it, no one else can use that line to connect. However, and one of the things that's interesting about Through the Desert is there are no lines. You actually make the lines through the desert. And because you're connecting two spots, because you're not picking a line to extend that network, there's absolutely no restriction on that, as opposed to Ticket to Ride or Power Grid, whereas you might be able to connect City A and City B just like I already did, but you're going to have to go through City C to do it because you got to pick a indirect way to do it, which is a real difference. That's interesting because I didn't think about that until you brought that up.
Well, and I think that's one of the big strategies of games that utilize this mechanic of blocking other people's routes off or other people's networks off so that they'll have to go around or that they can't accomplish it at all. Yeah, I think we've all played a game of Ticket to Ride where you build a track and somebody at the table yells and slams down a ticket card and says, "Now I can't do this ticket."
Oh, yeah.
Because there is a finite amount of ways to get from one city to another city, and if all of those are taken, you simply won't be able to play the game or complete that ticket or do your strategy.
And sometimes that's intentional.
Yes.
Yeah.
Depending on how aggressive that's exactly where I was going. Depending on how aggressively you play, I played a game of Ticket to Ride Nordic Countries once, and I'm not going to mention who I was playing with, but at the end of the game, I took one route. It became obvious partway through the game that all of their routes went through these two cities that were connected. And I had no reason to take that intersection of those two cities, that line, no reason to take it other than to block them. And I did, and I destroyed their game. They ended up, whereas Ticket to Ride, you will typically end up with points in the 100, at least over 100. This person ended up with a total of 9 points for the entire game because I did that. And
what a jerk
I don't
move.
normally, it really was, and I don't normally do that, but this had been somebody who had been bragging about how badly they beat me in these games all the time.
Yeah.
And it was time to take them to task. So,
and there's a balance of that strategy, right? Of, yeah, that might be the best strategy to win the game. But we've talked about before, like, is that strategy worth taking off another person to the extent that it might? Now, evidently in that case it was, but there have been times too where it's like you want everybody at the table to have a good experience, so you may make it harder for them, but not completely cut them off. But then there are times, like I've been playing Settlers of Catan, where, especially with 4 players, there's not a lot of space on that board.
Right.
So sometimes your only decision is to completely cut somebody else off because that's about all there is for you to do.
Well, and I think some of that has to play into how much you enjoy the game as well.
Right.
If you're only playing to cut people off or to win the game, you might not be enjoying your game the same way.
Yeah.
I mean, I know when we play Settlers, Lindsay's one of her whole goals is to build the longest road. And that's what she wants to do.
Yeah.
She'll do everything else to the detriment of doing that.
Yeah.
And so when you block her off from that, you're essentially saying, well, your game doesn't matter as much anymore.
So there's 2 things that go on there. One of these days, we'll have a discussion on strategy where we can talk about at what point does it make sense to play defense and play prevent, so to speak, as opposed to play offense. And I find that I probably play prevent too much and I lose because nobody else is playing prevent. So I start playing prevent on everybody and I'm the one who takes the beating. But part of that is just this, it's part of how the psychology of your game group and how alpha your gamers are, right? I mean, there are people who play Ticket to Ride and they play it hyper aggressively. They will block wherever they can. They will,
Yeah.
and then Ticket to Ride's a great gateway game. I certainly am not going to teach new players who've never played these kinds of hobby games before, bring them in and say, now here's how you play this game, and then bare my teeth and go at them at full strength. And it's not that I'm not playing my best. It's that I'm not playing a blocking strategy. I almost never play that game that way because to me, that game is all about how do I that's a great game for everybody gets a sense of, well, at least you can see some cool stuff I built. And I never got frustrated because, I might get blocked, but it wasn't because anybody was trying to block me. It's just that there's 4 players and only 2 routes into that city, so they were gone by the time I could get there.
Yeah, but I do think this network building, route building mechanic kind of lends itself to those strategies more than some other mechanics do. That strategy of blocking others out, of playing not just what's best for me, but kind of net what benefits me and hurts you, and what's kind of the net benefit of that. So I could get 12 points with this route, but if I can get 8 with this route and block you from getting 12, I'm going to take that because it blocks you more. So I think this mechanic really lends itself to more of that kind of play than maybe some other mechanics we've talked about.
I think that's probably true. So I looked up some of the games that use this mechanic, and I was at first thinking, oh, this is a mechanic that was not really high on my list. But as I went through it and Ticket to Ride and Catan and Power Grid showed up, I was like, yeah, I guess I like games with this mechanic more than I thought.
So Shane, you were talking before we started recording about how you think Power Grid's different because it's not a direct route, but it's a network.
Yeah, so in Power Grid, Frank kind of talked about how in a lot of these games, all of the routes are defined and you're just claiming the routes. But in Power Grid, you're not actually claiming routes. You're claiming the cities that all of the routes are connecting. So in Power Grid, right, you're trying to power as many cities as possible. So you're building in each city. First round, they cost 10. First phase is what it's called in the game. Second phase, you can then build on the same ones other people have. And it feels different because you're not necessarily building the routes between cities or claiming them, but you're just building on the cities themselves, especially since I can actually use a route, go through your city, and use a route on the other end. So in that game, you can block people by building in cities, but if they have the resources, you really can't do any blocking because you can always use the routes to go through other people's cities.
But the power lines are there regardless of what
Yeah,
who's powering through.
yeah, absolutely.
Okay, now I did not understand when you were talking about before. I couldn't see the difference, but now that makes a whole lot of sense because I didn't think about the fact that you really aren't buying a route. You are buying access to a city.
Right.
The route that you pick to do that is open to everybody.
Correct.
Well, and it's open to whichever route you can make to get there, because there's always, or
That's
there's
right.
usually multiple routes to get there.
And it
Yes.
never goes away, right? A route is always available if you can pay for it.
Yes, if the fact that you took it doesn't mean I can't use it.
Right.
One of the things I find interesting in Power Grid, though, is that once you reach a certain point limit in the game, that second spot in those cities open up. So someone can potentially use the exact same route you did later in the game, just cost them a little bit more to do it.
Yeah, and that kind of gets to the network building part of this. So in Ticket to Ride, you really are just building a route. The only way that the network of it, so the cities in which you're building and their connectedness, that really only matters based on the tickets you have, that you have to connect certain cities. But in Power Grid, it's really about, right, kind of expanding this network that you have so that you're going to have better access to more cities as the game goes on. Right? We've all played games where we kind of get pushed into a corner that gets really expensive, and then it's really hard to expand out of that because, right, on the east side of the board, it might cost 3 or 7 to go from city to city. And then on the west side of the board, it's like 21 to go from one city to another.
Because they're further apart.
Yeah, so really the
or it's
building
just more expensive.
Really building your
That's
network
true.
there is really to get yourself into a position to be in a better position further in the game. It's like a spider web.
Kind of is. You just really got me thinking about this again. And
Mark the date. I finally said something that made sense.
that's not true. You've made sense on other occasions.
Once or twice.
Yeah,
Nothing comes to mind.
it's a pretty sparse calendar, but
I remember at least one other time remembering you saying
Yes.
mark the calendar. So we've done it twice at least.
Twice in 2 seasons. That's pretty good.
So that's interesting because I think that's part of the reason why I really like Power Grid and I really like Ticket to Ride. I guess I'm sitting here thinking, is it the fact that one is more you're focused on the connections? Now I get why that definition that we read has said connection games might be considered separate from network building. I would not consider them separate because they're not that much different, but I can see now where they were coming from. But I'm trying to think now, do I like Power Grid better than Ticket to Ride because it's got that network aspect to it as opposed to the connection aspect to it? Or is it just that, in all honesty, Ticket to Ride is a game I play a lot, especially at Christmas when we've got people coming over who aren't real familiar with these games. It's such a great gateway game. I don't think I've ever had anybody walk away from a Ticket to Ride table and say, that sucked. That was an awful game.
I agree. I think anytime I've taught Ticket to Ride, as soon as we're done, their response is, can we play again?
Yeah.
Because it's so quick to pick up that after one game, almost everybody at the table is an equal. That everybody's ready to dive in and dig in.
So is it just me that doesn't really like playing Ticket to Ride? I think it's far too slow of a game.
So the other aspect to it is that I think if you play it too often, it wears out its welcome.
Yeah.
Well, see, I think the game just moves too slowly. I think you have too limited number of actions on each one of your turns.
Yeah, so in Ticket to Ride, you either have to take cards or lay track.
Right.
That you do one of those two. Or take more tickets. So you get one of 3 options. So I can see that. It's a very limited,
So first I
set of actions.
want to thank you for blowing my story.
Yeah. I didn't walk away from a game saying I didn't like it. I don't really enjoy the game as much because it's so slow.
I don't like playing it with experienced gamers because I know there are other games for us to play. Like I would if it was the 3 of us, I'd never say, let's play Ticket to Ride.
Right.
But since I do enjoy teaching games, I really enjoy the process of teaching others that game and playing through it with them.
Now, I will say, when we first bought Ticket to Ride and we played it with some people, we didn't read that rule that you can only do one of those actions, and you can do all 3 of those actions on your turn, and I enjoyed the game then.
Yeah.
It was a much faster game. It played a lot faster. It was a better game.
I mean, maybe that is
house rule.
Maybe that is a way to speed it up. Yeah.
So I think I would agree with you. If the 3 of us are going to sit down and play a game, it's not going to be Ticket to Ride. If we're going to play,
but it could be Power Grid.
It could very definitely could be Power Grid. But I think the difference is for me, it's not the mechanic of it's slightly different this way versus slightly different that. It's just how often I've played. I've probably played 40 games of Ticket to Ride. I enjoy it, but there's not a lot left for me to explore. And at some point in time, it would be probably great to do an episode on exploring the game space. But I think I've pretty much explored all of the game space in Ticket to Ride. What makes Ticket to Ride fun for me is bringing new people and saying, hey, here's a kind of game that doesn't have player elimination, plays in a reasonable amount of time, is not what you grew up with. Here's this kind of new style of game, and let's sit down and play it, and you'll be amazed at how much fun it is. Because there still are a lot of people out there in the world who, when you say I play game, my biggest hobby is play games, they look at you like either A, you haven't grown up yet, or B, you just landed from another planet.
Yeah. Yeah, I just, for youth group, we just had a lock-in a few weekends ago, and several of the teenagers, it was like 3 a.m, and I was like, do y'all want to play a game? And we pulled out Ticket to Ride and probably played 3 to 4 games of it, and they loved it, and they really jumped onto it. And it is so fun to see
They
them.
really got on board.
Yeah. But it really is exciting to see them get excited about a game, especially the type of game that they, didn't really know existed.
Yes.
Right? All these games are kind of a different world than, as we've talked about, than most people live in their gaming life.
Right.
Now, I think it's expanding, right? The fact that you can go to Target and buy a lot of these games now is definitely changing the landscape of games. But
So what I find interesting being at work is I hear more and more people talking about going to the gaming cafes and gaming bars that are opening and playing games there. But what I hear is that they don't enjoy it very much. And I'm wondering how much of that is lack of someone there to introduce them to the right games to play there, or how much people not knowing the games when they go there. And I don't know the answer to that, but it's almost a danger of coming into the world as well, is if you're there with a group of people and they don't know the games, you might pick something that you're either not ready for or just don't have the preparation for.
I would agree. There's somewhere I heard there were roughly 4,000 games a year now being released. And at that kind of pace, you're talking about an ocean of games. How does someone navigate that when they have no experience at all with it? And that will have to be a discussion we have at some point in time.
Well, and if you go on Board Game Geek and you look at the top rated games, I wouldn't have anybody who hasn't played a game pick one of those up, especially not having read the rules beforehand,
right.
and say, go play.
Right. Because
they're not going to enjoy it.
In fact, that's part of the reason why we've spent these past 2 seasons going through game types and game mechanisms, is so when you start doing that, you can start to filter this stuff. You, the listener, can start filtering this stuff and start figuring out, oh, this game's going to play like this other game, and and that will help you navigate. Hopefully.
And I'm so proud of Jenna because, over the last several months, when we've talked about games, she starts using some of the language of gaming, the mechanics.
What last night?
Even just last night, she said, what did she say?
What's the end game, or what's the win condition for this?
Yeah. So, just fall in love with her more and more every.
I'm so proud of Jenna because even though her husband doesn't listen to our board game podcast, she does.
Yeah, everybody.
I was proud of
That's true.
Brent, I was proud of you yesterday because there are some people in our game group who are tough to play with for various reasons. And I'm probably one of them, depending on
we
what
all
you
have
like.
our own things.
We all have our own things
to play with. Yeah.
But Brent got stuck yesterday playing 3 games with one of the people that who is hard for him to play with sometimes, and did it gracefully.
I think it went pretty well.
It went pretty well.
That was good. Yeah, yesterday we tried out the Harry Potter Hogwarts. What is it called?
Hogwarts Battles.
Hogwarts Battles.
Which is not route building at all.
Yeah.
No, we digress. So what we have not talked about, because it is, as I'm sitting here and I was actually thinking about this, despite the conversation, Catan, we mentioned that right up front.
Yeah.
And it is route building. It's more defined than Through the Desert, but less defined than Ticket to Ride. So you lay down hexagons, as we've described in other episodes. You lay down hexagons to form the board. The intersection of 3 hexagons, where they come together, you can build a town there. There's a distance rule and some other things, but you can build a town there. But you can't build unless it can connect to a previously built town with a road of your color.
And
But
roads,
how you get there doesn't matter. as
and
long as
roads you
do
build
that.
on the edges of the hexagons.
Yes, along the yes.
So it's not as abstract kind of network as you're building as through the desert, because there are defined places where you can build your roads and settlements and cities. Other than the distance requirement, there really isn't a defined strategy place you're trying to get to. Like Ticket to Ride, you're trying to connect one city to another city. How you do that is your choice. But in Catan, it's really, you're kind of building your routes and networks based on what's going to get you the most resources, which in turn lets you build a bigger network and route.
Right. Or longest road.
Or longest
Or
road.
longest road if that's your
If that's your thing.
Yeah, so, and I think Catan's interesting because it kind of fits into both the route and network idea, because if you're going for longest road, it really is that continuous route that you're looking for.
Yes.
But a lot of times, you're just kind of all over the place and got a windmill kind of look going on about your settlements. And sometimes you're going along the edges of the board, and sometimes you cut right through the center. And so I really like the variation, because you never know kind of what you're trying to build until you see where everybody else is on the board and what everybody else is doing.
So it strikes me, maybe I'm wrong, you guys tell me if I'm wrong, but what
We will.
the difference is, if in Ticket to Ride, or in Through the Desert, you're trying to connect this spot on the map to this spot on the map.
Yeah.
In both Power Grid and Catan, there aren't spots on the map. You're going to put down your own spots on the map. Now, there are in Power Grid, there's cities, but you're not necessarily trying to connect city A and city B.
Right.
You're trying to, I could connect city C, D, whatever from city A. It depends on which one's going to get me the most points or build me the best network. My point is, so there are places where I can build, but in Ticket to Ride, you have cards that say you have to connect these two cities. So Through the Desert is kind of in the middle, I guess. I don't know, but
Yeah.
the point is you get to decide where to build, so you have more. I don't have to go down this path. I don't have to get to here.
No, I totally
One's
get
got
you.
a destination, one does not.
And maybe this is the difference between route and network, right? Route is get from point A to point B. You get points. Network is you're building a network on the map, which is going to increase your resource generation. It's going to get you more resources, which in turn helps build a network, helps you get victory points. Because in Catan, you're really striving to get to where you're going to get the resources you want. Not necessarily one place to another. It's just, okay, I need to be able to produce ore. How can I get to that hexagon that gives me ore? And it doesn't matter how I get there. I just want to get there.
Right.
And so the network is really about kind of building these connecting areas that help you to get more of the resources you need. Because in Power Grid, right, you get more, is it money?
It's
in
money.
Power Grid, you get the more cities you have, the more that you can power, you're getting more money. So it's not about which cities are you powering, it's just how many are you able to power.
Right.
So is it fair to say route versus network is whether it's about the journey or the destination?
Yeah. I think that's really accurate.
I wish y'all could have seen the pride on Brent's face as he said that. He was so happy with himself.
Now I'm going to blow the whole thing up
Ah,
because that's true of Ticket to Ride till you get to the end of the game, right? Because particularly on some Ticket to Ride maps, you're going to get to the point where it starts making sense for you to draw more destination cards. The destination cards tell you have to connect this city to that city. And if you've done a sufficient network, you'll draw cards and you're like, oh, I've already got that one complete. Those points are in the bag. Boom, lay it down. Or I don't have to build this vast network. I don't have to build this long line because I've got all but the last connection, the last mile done. I have to build one connection and that card's done. Boom, points are in the bag.
But the essence of it is still city to city.
It is, but to some extent, it makes sense if you're going to play the destination ticket strategy, and there are other ways to play it.
Yeah.
But you got to have a sufficient enough network, particularly some kind of spine that traverses the map, that you can build short routes from a city to the spine, and then the rest of the connections are already made.
I did play one game of Ticket to Ride where somebody did their initial tickets. They were like 2 really low number tickets, so really easy to complete. And then they just built all of the 6s on the board, all the 6 tracks, because every 6 tracks you go to get 15 points.
Yep.
And they completely ignored the tickets and just built all the really big tracks, which A, blocked us from getting where we wanted to go, and then B, just got them a ton of points. And they ended up like wiping the board with us. Like it wasn't even close.
When Daniel was younger, that was consistently his strategy, and he consistently did well.
Yeah.
I won't say he won all the time. He won certainly his fair share of games.
Yeah.
And always placed well.
I think the worst feeling in Tickets to Ride is when you're near the end of the game and you've got this great north to south route, and then you draw tickets and they're all big east to west. And you're like,
yep.
And you're not anywhere close. Or you literally don't have enough trains left over to complete them.
Well, but that one, you should know not to draw destination tickets when you're that low on trains.
Well, yeah. I still do. Maybe this is why I lose games. I know I shouldn't, and I do it anyway.
Well, you're pressing your luck, and
it's not working out for you.
If that's, well, it depends on whether winning is fun or playing is fun, right? I've said it lots of times before. If it was all winning for me, I would have given up this hobby a long time ago.
Yeah. I think most of us would.
Yeah.
In any 4-player game, there are 3 losers.
That's true.
So.
And a lot of times we're sitting around the table here.
Yes.
Yes. So, are there any other of these router network building games that we have played or enjoyed? We've talked about Catan, Tickets to Ride, and Power Grid.
And Through the Desert. Are there any others that we can think of, or games with this mechanic introduced in them? So I don't think I have a lot of games like that. Santiago has a little bit of that in it, in that you're trying to build this network of canals.
Yeah, the only other, it's really not, it's not building a route, but there's that little mechanic in Clash of Cultures, the trade routes, where you're trying to get either your settler or a ship within proximity of other cities. But even it's kind of network building, because you're building, right, this network of cities and trying to get your things
so
close to others and culturally influenced. But
when he comes up with a crazy idea like this, do I get to erase the Shane was brilliant on the calendar? Because no, that's just proximity. That's not. There's no route. There's no.
Maybe because route is in the name.
There you go. Yeah. You were going to say something, Brent.
So Sorrow, we talked about that a little bit. And even though that's a tile placement, and you're not connecting necessarily anything to. The whole goal is to not connect to the edge
of the board.
But you are the pieces you get out
and connect everyone else to the edge of the board.
But you are literally building routes. You are literally
building routes
as you go
throughout the game.
Yeah, that's a really, I really enjoyed that game. It takes like 10 minutes to play, assuming everybody's not taking too much time. But that game's so interesting because it's so easy to make yourself lose without realizing it. Like, you place a tile and you're like, this is going to be great, and then you're off the board.
Although you do have to have rules in place, like once you take your hand away from the tile, you can't change your mind, because it's one of those games where you can do something and then go, no, I don't want to do that, and pull it back so easily that you almost have to have some kind of rule that says, no, you screwed up.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's a pretty fun one.
It's one of the few player eliminations we actually enjoy playing.
Probably because the game's 10, 15 minutes, right? So the idea of Suro, it's the subtitle to it is The Way of the Path or something like that. It's got all these convoluted lines and tiles, and they loop around, and they do, as you connect them, they will go all kinds of crazy paths across the board, and that's how all of a sudden you realize, oh crud, I just ran into the edge of the board and I'm eliminated. Or I just ran into another player and I'm eliminated. And then the last person standing wins. But that's actually a really good filler, because it plays 8, I believe, at max.
Yeah, up to 8.
And takes very little time. And
I've played it several times, and it's not bad at any number.
No.
It's pretty good, 2 to 8.
Right.
Yeah.
The more I play it, the more I like it.
And yet it's a completely different type of route building game as any of the ones we've talked about, because, right, you're not establishing that you control a route, and you're not using your route to kind of build this network to get resources. You're really just trying to stay on the board and following these paths that you're building as you go. I mean, you can't get more route building than that game, because you're literally building the route that the pieces take on the board to not fall off the board.
I would agree. Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. Now, we've got some route building games that are coming up soon, I'm hoping, in the group. Like, I want to play Chicago Express, but that's a train game. A lot of train games are going to have that route network working stuff in it. What used to be referred to as Crayon Rail games are that way.
I've never heard that.
So there's a train game called Empire Limited, Empire Express. I can't remember what it is. that is famous. Obviously not famous enough for me to remember it, but it's kind of a train game. 18xx games are all, those also have a heavy stock ownership aspect to them. So there's a whole bunch of games. My point being that they run the gamut from the 18xx games are very heavy, take hours. Same thing with Crayon Rail games, all the way down to Ticket to Ride, which is an hour and a half. Rules are not complex. After one play, if that long, everybody has down what they're doing. So these run the gamut. Personally, I would recommend that people play Ticket to Ride, and that would be a great introduction. Personally, I would recommend that people play Ticket to Ride. That would be a great introduction to our hobby.
Just not with Brent.
Or if we do, it's not going to be an hour and a half game. It's going to be a 30 to 45 minute game.
Yeah, because he's going to house rule it.
Yeah, there you go.
So please continue listening. We enjoy doing this. We hope you enjoyed listening to us. Have a great week. See, I don't say stupid things at the end. I just can't get to stop.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening. This is just a reminder that we are completing Season 2 and are ready to take our break throughout the month of April. We haven't decided what we will be doing in Season 3, but we hope you'll listen. If you do have ideas, feel free to email us or contact us through our Facebook page. In the meantime, we will see you in May. Thanks.
This has been the Analog Gamers Podcast. Thanks for listening. Please spread the word about our podcast, which can be found at theanaloggamers.libsyn.com. You can email us at theanaloggamers@gmail.com or find us on Facebook as The Analog Gamers. Our intro and outro are recorded by Daniel Feldman. Logo artwork provided by Tabitha Jordan Nichols. The Analog Gamers Podcast is licensed under Attribution, No Commercial, Non-Derivative, Creative Commons 4.0 license.